No, I'm not talking about Sonic Adventure, Sonic Unleashed, or Sonic Mania. I'm not even talking about any of the original games. No siree, today I'm talking about Sonic R. It seems people either hate or love this 3D Sonic racing game, but I love it. The graphics are vibrant and colorful, the hectic tracks are a blast to zoom around, there's tons of hidden areas to explore, and if you can get used to the janky controls, it's an amazing game. To talk about Sonic R's inception, I first gotta set the scene. Sonic was huge in the 90s and he was everywhere. After Sonic's debut on the Sega Genesis in 1991, he exploded. There were Sonic cartoons, Sonic toys, Sonic Drip, even Sonic Pasta. He was really that dude in the 90s, and after its initial success, Sega just kept the ball rolling. They followed up with Sonic 2, Sonic 3, then Sonic & Knuckles, and about a dozen other games like a pinball game and a weird kids schoolhouse game. After the release of all these games, it was the mid-90s, and 3D technology in video games was quickly becoming more and more advanced. Consoles like the PlayStation 1 were making Sega nervous with their impressive 3D capabilities. So, to try to keep up with the competition, Sega released the Sega Saturn in 1994 in Japan and the following year for the rest of the world. Although the Saturn had some amazing games for it, it ultimately failed. Its release date was pushed up almost 6 months due to Sega CEO getting nervous about the release of the PS1. It was difficult for game developers to make games on. It was $100 more expensive than the PS1 at a retail price of $400, and most importantly, it didn't launch with any big Sonic game on it. The first Sonic game for the console, Sonic 3D Blast, was released almost 2 years later in 1996 as an attempt to bring Sonic into the third dimension. At the time, Sega's team was busy working on one of my favorite Saturn games, Nights into Dreams, so they contracted a small developer named Traveler's Tales to help with the bulk of the game's programming. Traveler's Tales had previously made a number of games for the Genesis that impressed Sega, so they entrusted their golden child Sonic to them. The game launched with generally positive reviews and was a moderate success for Sega. It didn't age the best, and most people nowadays don't speak on it too fondly. To be fair, it was an isometric Sonic platforming game, but Sega must have loved it because they contracted Traveler's Tales yet again for another Sonic game. That game was Sonic R. And if you're confused at this point why they didn't just call it Sonic Racing, don't worry, I'm confused too. After their work on Sonic 3D Blast, Traveler's Tales began working on a new game for the Saturn to compete with a popular racing game at the time, PlayStation's Formula 1. Around this time, Sega approached Traveler's Tales asking them to make a Sonic racing game in time for the holiday season of 1997. Developers accepted Sega's offer and they got to work. Just like their workflow on Sonic 3D Blast, Sonic Team would be in charge of level design and the game's overall vision, while it was up to Traveler's Tales to program the game. Sonic Team would send over rough sketches of the tracks and characters, and Traveler's Tales would implement their ideas and turn the sketches into 3D models. Sega was in such a rush to release the game that only 5 tracks were finished in time for the holidays. Despite there being only 5 tracks to race on, every track stands out with its own distinct setting and terrain. The tracks all feature normal Sonic game characteristics like loop-de-loops, collectible rings that boost speed, shortcuts, and hidden areas to explore. Sonic R featured Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, Amy Rose, and a bunch of other classic Sonic characters that you can only unlock by completing challenges and finding hidden items around the tracks. Unfortunately, only a few characters are actually well-rounded with their handling and speed, while the rest are just absolutely unusable. Amy Rose is frustratingly slow despite being the only character to have a car, and Eggman has a useless missile ability and can't jump. Although being a rather short game with little content, Sonic R was still given its props for its technical achievements. At the time, many games suffered from a short draw distance and pop-up. Take Daytona USA for instance. As you're racing, objects in the distance tend to abruptly render in or pop up, hence the term. This was a common problem many games from this time period suffered from, but not Sonic R. The clever developers from Traveler's Tales figured out a way to manipulate the Sega Saturn's hardware to eliminate this issue. They used the Saturn's sprite color calculation system to give the illusion of transparency. To my understanding, the system was basically the way the Saturn colored background textures, and they used it by mixing different color ratios. If you want to learn more about the specifics of the game's technical side of things, I highly recommend learning from someone smarter like John Burton, the main programmer for the game, who actually has a great YouTube channel where he speaks on the development process in detail. But to sum it up, the brilliance of John Burton and Traveler's Tales led to Sonic R being one of the most visually impressive Sega Saturn games, and upon the game's release in 1997, its graphics were one of the most common praises for the game. I still think this game looks incredible today, but back in 1997, I'm sure it looked even better. And at this point, I'm going on and on about how amazing this game is, so I should probably explain why so many people hate it. To start, the controls are really finicky. When you first start the game, it feels almost impossible to steer. You're banging off the walls, you're falling off the tracks, and it's an overall really frustrating experience. Many reviewers at the time also felt this way, but some shared the same perspective I do. To quote a 1998 entry from Next Generation magazine, maneuvering characters around tight turns and corners takes a lot of patience, but the proper techniques with time can be learned. I first discovered Sonic R through its music. I had never played or even heard of the game. I just heard a song and was blown away by how good it was and imagine how different it was from the usual Sonic music I was used to. Naturally, I had to play the game to satisfy my curiosity, and honestly, after a few minutes, I considered deleting it and giving up. Controls are arguably the most important thing about any racing game, and at first attempt, Sonic Rs are terrible. For how hard it is to turn in the game, it definitely doesn't help that the tracks are filled with sudden twists and turns and all sorts of obstacles. After my initial playthrough, I watched some videos of other people playing to see if I was just that bad or if it was the game, and I learned that it's kind of both. Sonic R can definitely seem impossible to play, but there is a way. Best way to play is to lean into corners and constantly use drifting to make sharper turns. Also, just play Sonic. In my opinion, he's the best character to learn the fundamentals of the game with because he's fast and has pretty good handling. Although there are some people who love Sonic R the way I do, I see so many people online hating on the game purely for its controls, which is valid, but I would also bet they didn't put a lot of time into it to really understand how they work. It doesn't play like a normal racing game or a normal Sonic platforming game. You just have to view it as something completely different. Once I started viewing the controls as hard to grasp instead of poorly made, I had a lot of fun with this game and it quickly became one of my favorite Sonic games ever. It's just mindless fun, and after a few hours you can get so good you can abuse all the shortcuts and whiz around the tracks like a pro. You could beat the whole game in about 2 hours. It's not a long game whatsoever, but I genuinely didn't mind playing the same tracks back to back to back. This process of playing the tracks over and over again also really didn't bother me because of how good the soundtrack is. The soundtrack is a blend of Eurodance, jazz, and a pure 90s feel. It's completely unlike any other Sonic game soundtrack, but in my opinion, it fits the game perfectly. The composer of the soundtrack, Richard Jacques, wrote the lyrics and composed all of the music in just a few months, with help from the talented singer TJ Davis on the vocals. Richard Jacques' parents were both music teachers, so it's no wonder his love for music blossomed at such an early age. At just 5 years old, he had learned how to play the piano. Throughout his early life, he continued studying music at school with an interest especially in orchestral and jazz music, and even was awarded scholarships to study at music academies before finally graduating from college with a bachelor's degree in music in 1994. Jacques got a job making music for Sega just 3 days after graduating college. I can't describe how jealous I am of that, but he immediately got to work and his first video game debut was for a shoot 'em up on the 32X called Dark Side. A few racing games and 2 years later, Jacques got the chance to make music for the European version of the game Shinobi. But after Shinobi X, Jacques was assigned to work on Sonic 3D Blast's Traveler's Tales and then Sonic R a year later. In March of 1997, Richard Jacques traveled to Japan to discuss Sonic R's musical direction with Sonic creator Yuji Naka. Yuji Naka asked Jacques to make a track for a demo version of the game that would be revealed at E3 that year. Jacques produced all the instrumentals and TJ Davis contributed the vocals. TJ Davis had previously made a name for herself, providing background vocals for artists like Blur and even featuring on a song called Brilliant Feeling that charted on the UK singles chart in 1996. The result of their first collaboration was the legendary track Supersonic Racing. Upon hearing this song, Yuji Naka was blown away by TJ Davis's vocals and said he wanted her on every single song. And that's how we got the Sonic R soundtrack we know and love today. So many Sonic fans say this is one of their favorite Sonic soundtracks, and I'd have to agree. There's just something so relaxing about listening to all the songs while running around the tracks over and over again. Dance music and racing games just go hand in hand. The soundtrack's groovy, it's beyond catchy, and impossible to not sing along to after a while. Even the people who hate this game still love the soundtrack. That's how good it is. And while I respect that this game isn't everyone's cup of tea, I love it. I think it's overhated, underrated, and worth giving a second chance. With all that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this brief summary and history of one of my favorite Sonic games, and now let's get to the music side of things. I'm gonna make my own Sonic R inspired track. Let's get right to it. So we are in FL Studio and I already got started on the drums. I really just did a really simple house bounce with some sounds from the TR-909. We got a kick and a clap. And I did a little open hat. Then I added the secondary open hat, but I actually moved it to the side a little bit to give it some bounce. And for these melodies, I found that the Sonic R soundtrack uses a lot of those cheesy 90s sounds. So I'm going to be using M1 and JV1080 for that. So I already started on the chords a little bit, but I just did some really simple chords. I did a minor ninth, followed up by the 759, I think that's what it's called. And then from there, I just kind of noodle around. You know, I don't know music theory, so I'm just going off what sounds good. And here's how the chords sound so far. It's definitely a good starting point, but I think these chords need to be a little bit more interesting. So let's go ahead and switch them up in the second half. I think I hear it like going up here, like... You know you got to survive. All right, let's get this pad in here. Now I want to add a few counters, and then I think I want to do some strings just to make it sound as massive as possible. Maybe some bells. I love me some bells. Do, 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 do. Try and get some brats in here. Let's just keep making it bigger and bigger. You know, we got to make it sound grand. Somehow during the recording, some of my audio got messed up, so I'm just gonna break every sound down. So we got the piano from M1. Then we got a string again from M1. Then we got a bunch of brass sounds from Xenology. I just layered a bunch so it sounded really thick and like wide, if that makes sense. Then I went ahead and layered the bell sound with the same sound from the piano chords. Gotta add some effects. Every other bass sound, I put it up an octave just to give it that like 90s sound, I guess. Just made it super bouncy. I just love making these type of videos, so I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Next video is definitely not going to be a racing video. I don't know why I did 2 racing videos in a row, but hey. Sonic R soundtrack goes crazy, and I don't think that I'm crazy for saying that. If you watched this far, let me know in the comments what I should do for my next video. Peace.